let's talk about this city council a vote 5-2 in favor of moving forward with negotiations. So one thing that I just want to get off the bat right now, because there's been a lot of confusion of shady dealings behind the scenes and whatever. This is just the standard legal process. When there's I forget what the period is specifically called, but you are not supposed to engage in conversation, contact, whatever, city officials and the prospective builder. And now the lawyer, I forget his name. Was it Nick Wood? I'm terrible
Woods,
with
yep.
names. Woods, but he was told two different council members went to go say hello to him at like different functions, and he I can't talk to you, and walked away. Thought that was pretty funny. Also, I do appreciate that disclosure. But there was nothing shady going on there. They put forth their proposal. City of Tempe, of course, gets to look over it, gets to think about what questions they might want to ask. And this was, hey, should we engage in negotiations or not? So nothing was going on behind the scenes. It's just a weird legal thing where you have to not talk. The Coyotes aren't allowed to engage with like the City of Tempe, the public. They can't go door to door. Like, it's just, that's why it feels weird. If you got a problem with that, please do not hesitate to contact like your local representatives and be like, hey, is there a way to change that? And if there is enough noise there, maybe stuff gets changed. Maybe it doesn't. That's on you guys. But I thought that was one thing that got mixed up a lot. So that's a standard procedure. Anyway.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, did you have something to add? I was going to get an 8-hour slog.
So I was just going to say, on top of that, so one side couldn't speak, and then all the contrarians were allowed to speak to Tempe, which is ridiculous. How can a contrarian bring up their opinions, and then the people that are pro for whatever aren't allowed to talk about it? That feels a little weird.
Well, it's a weird system because one thing is I had my wife, when I was still driving home from work, she was listening to all the different comments, the public comments, and I was like, all right, give me how many yeses and nos, and out of the first 6 or 7 nos, by the time I got home, we turned it off. All but one were woefully misinformed, so that's also why I don't like the process, because people, for one, weren't actually reading it. Even some people that were pro it were getting some minor things wrong, so I really wish that more people would have been reading into the actual proposal. I got some things wrong as well, but it's kind of, I'm not well versed in legal speak and legalese, as we like to call it here, so I do not know how to interpret a lot of it on my own, which is another reason why I think it's a really weird process. But without wasting any more time into that, it caused a lot of confusion, and it is weird to have people that are not informed on it. Like, I don't know what's going on, but I know I'm vehemently against it, which is the joke I share with my wife, because I'm like, that's what it comes off as, is it's like, you don't know what's going on, but then again, it's also a byproduct, of that process. Anyway, what was it, 8.5 hours?
Yeah, 8.5 hours. I joined in about 30 minutes late, unfortunately, so I missed Gary Bettman's remarks, but I did end up hearing some quotes from him on Twitter afterwards. I think it started at 2. I joined in about 2:40, but I got to hear a lot of the significant news about what all the contrarians are trying to spread their information that is just woefully bad. And it is. It looks like a good deal. Like, to me, there's nothing that Tempe would be on the hook for if it were to fall through. Mr. Morello is he's not, because this is the funny thing. The QB lady, I don't remember her last name. One of the contrarian. QB, yeah. She was one of the no votes. She put up like this weird little pamphlet where it's like, oh, this is Morello Group. Look at how much money they can get for loans. It's like only $5,000. This is scary. It's like they never said that they were going to take loans. Look at how it's structured. He's backing this project with his own assets. If it goes through, his own assets are screwed. Do you really think he wants this to fail? You know, it was so crazy to me. I'm like, why are you even bringing this up? Like, they're not crediting anything. And then on top of that, the other contrarian point was with the city of Sky Harbor, which is hilariously bad. If they were to go through with this project, the only thing that really scares me is that if Sky Harbor tries to sue this project, that would slow down the process. We would be wasting maybe a year, maybe 2 years on flipping legal problems. But when you look at the, I can't remember what the agreement was called. It was a 3-letter acronym. When you look at that agreement, they're not breaking any rules. The only rules that they're breaking is a temporary crane, which is going to be at 26 days long, where it will pierce the one engine flight height for, once again, 26 days. And if they time that properly, all of a sudden that pierce of 26 days, if they do it in the wintertime, it doesn't even really matter because the planes can lift well above that. The reason it's like that is because during the summertime, obviously hot air, hot engine, you kind of can't cool off the engine as easily if you were to, for some reason, lose one engine. That's why it takes a lot longer to lift off when it's summertime. So there is like some concern, but it's 26 days. And as they just showed, the Coyotes showed, on the other side, on the Phoenix side of the airport, they already did this. They already did this with a project of similar height in the similar decibel range for residential. Like,
but also, just to kind of throw in real quick, I want to say it was Mr. Gutierrez towards the very end. So there's a disclosure there. It was a long thing. I might misremember a couple of things, but they even specifically mentioned that they could even lower the height of that crane. And it pretty much, like, they were even talking about, because one of the very logical questions, actually, surprising side note for me, I'm someone who doesn't particularly care for governing bodies. I surprisingly think this Tempe City Council is reasonable. They actually sounded like they cared. But they asked, what happens if there's a conflict here? And it's like, we'll work with them. And they even mentioned towards the very end, I can't remember if it was Gutierrez or Woods, but mentioned how they can lower that crane height. And there's different things that they can do. On top of that, Miss Cubie also mentioned the residential and there's a funny little interaction super late where one of the councilmen was like, you got to keep filibustering, and she got very Karen-esque, but reasonably, if you say yes to negotiations, part of your negotiations could be, well, I want to get rid of this residential, which I think would be a good idea anyway, just to avoid any of the headache, because from what I gather, 85 to 90% of Sky Harbor's beef was with that residential. I think per some of the agreements, the city of Phoenix would be on the hook for providing some sort of sound blocking with the construction. I forget what the exact wording was.
Noise deadening.
And noise deadening, there you go. And then also they would have to notify anyone moving in that you can't make noise complaints. But even though that those were facts that were stated, and we know, they still proceeded to bring up, we'll get all these noise complaints to it. It was a couple public comments primarily, but we'll get noise complaints to our amazing airport. I used to work there 2 different times, mind you, so there is a bit of disclosure as well. I don't think it's that nice. I don't like Sky Harbor. Anyway, but a lot of these concerns really were just, we'll work with them. It's stuff that we can work out in conversation. The no vote, I forget the other woman's name, but I think she had some valid concerns, but some other ones that stuck out to me that were weird, like, maybe, I'm a little uncomfortable with the, what was it, PFP they put out? I forget what the acronym was, but it's RFP to see if anyone wants to build on that land, and brought up, we're landlocked, this is the last big land we have for a project or whatever, and theoretically, I kind of get where she's coming from, but at the same time, does that not also, in some way, shape, or form, suggest she did not do her job properly the first time? If she's saying now, I don't think we thought this properly through, or I have some problems with that declaration we put out to see if there's any potential builders that want to use that land. To me, I get what she's trying to say, but it comes across to me like, then you should have done your job better before. Like, 6-7 months ago, you should have thought this through more. And on top of that, if now all of a sudden you're concerned with housing, which I do understand, even though I thought some of the citizens of Tempe bringing it up was a little weird, the whole affordable housing thing, the Coyotes are already going to make a contribution towards affordable housing outside of the area. You don't need to have that additional residential. Here, if I were the Coyotes, I would be like, hey, you guys want more community-oriented stuff? We'll remove the residential and do like this some sort of like community thing here for you. I would do that just for the negotiations. That's my personal view on it. It's just, I thought it was weird. I thought it was just kind of weird the way they were bringing it up.
So what I was going to say is, like, what's so cringy to me is you had 2 no votes, right? One says, we can't do this. Let's chop the residential off because of Sky Harbor. The other one's saying, let's just completely can the deal and put residential there. It's like, what are you going to do? So that's what doesn't make sense to me. You're talking about a literal landfill that has to be filled 30 feet deep, has to get pulled out and then put in with new dirt. It's going to cost over $140 million. Are you really going to spend $140 million to get this 42 acres back up to par, then put low-income housing on it that you potentially might not even be able to do because Sky Harbor will try to sue you? Really? Like, you're not putting a tower there. You're not building a massive tower for more living space. This is... Like, she made the reference, let's not put a square block into a circle hole. This is the only circle that can go into that circle hole.
That's also why I would pander to it and be like, hey, here's a little community center thing. Or I wouldn't be like, hey, we'll build this so it's more community oriented, because one of the other concerns was, hockey games are expensive, which these current tickets are kind of expensive because it's a 5,000 seat arena for the one they're playing in right now. Even though they're selling pretty well. I want to talk about that later. I do want to mention that later. But me personally, I would just pander that way and be like, look, we'll do some community-oriented stuff. We'll do a community center. We'll do something that the community themselves, they can use, and it's accessible to anyone. That's what I would do. I'd get rid of the residential, keep the hotels, obviously, because that's going to help bring in a lot of money. But the community thing would also go a long way to build goodwill, as well as be like, okay, your major concerns were that people wouldn't be able to use it. The residential, in terms of like affordable housing, rents going up, as well as Sky Harbor. To me, just back in my mind, I'm not a lawyer. Anyone that is a lawyer can look at me and be like, oh, you're an idiot for this. Please comment below. But to me, that seems like the most logical, reasonable, here's the first step to try to get as many of the issues that were brought up dealt with. Like, that's the way I'm thinking on it. But all that being said, I genuinely feel like the council did a very good job asking the right questions. I do appreciate a lot of the support and the mindset behind it, and there's a lot of enthusiasm. And the TLDR was, we at least owe it to, I believe it was a gentleman that made the filibuster comment. He said we owe it to our constituents to at least move forward with negotiations and then get their opinion, because then the Coyotes would be allowed to, go into the community.
He even brought up a quote from you, too. I don't know if you heard that.
I don't know if he was referencing what I specifically said or what Tyler said, because we both said the exact same thing.
Okay.
But at the same time, it's like, I love that mindset. Same thing with, I forget his last name, I apologize, the city mayor, Corey. He seemed like a very, very cool dude.
Is it just Wood? Corey Wood?
Was it?
I'm
blanking. I apologize.
I think it's Corey Wood, and then our attorney was something Woods with the S.
So he was like, something my dad said. Corey, it never hurts to talk. It's just a conversation, and I loved again, coming from my own personal beliefs of not really caring for governing bodies. It seemed so ridiculously logical to be like, it's a conversation moving forward with negotiations. These concerns. Essentially, the mindset was, without the exact wording, let's see if we can find compromise here. And worst case scenario, we can't, and we move on. And I liked it. I liked that mindset, because that's all this was getting approval to have those conversations, be allowed to converse on the matter. And it was a huge win. I'm not gonna lie. I had to hold back tears throughout a lot of it, because you get people coming up sharing their stories, and they were talking about how much hockey means to them, and something I can relate to quite a bit. I mean, I wouldn't know you if it wasn't for hockey. I wouldn't have met my wife. Way too many. I'd be a completely different person. But it's hockey means a lot to this community, and as much as I've had, and I know I always bring it up, I've had disagreements with Coyotes fans about like what players they'll idolize or whatever. I can't deny the passion. I genuinely can't, and it's kind of that same heartwarming feeling I felt in the 2010 playoffs, where it's like I got bullied for being a Coyotes fan, but then I look around, who effing cares? Because look, all these people here to support it, everyone excited, and there to support something you love, like, man, that's something that I can't put into words how much I appreciated.
Yeah, something that really won over the council, it seemed like to me, because quite a few of them brought it back up to the point, was all the people that came up saying how the Coyotes, push their lives for the better. So we had Lindsay Fry come up who talked about she's the first, I don't know if she's the only, but she's the first Arizonan to win a winter sport medal. She won a silver medal with women's hockey as an Arizonan. I can't remember what his name was, but he came up and talked about Pride Pact, which was a LGBTQIA plus hockey group that kind of brought the community together and gave them a sense of pride to play with each other in hockey and connect further, And there was the last one who was a veteran. I think he was a Marine who helped start a league here in Arizona to help veterans have a sense of purpose. Because as he was talking about himself, when you get out of the military, unfortunately, suicide rates are quite significant for those service members because they've been trained in this mindset of, here's your task, do this task, and once they get out, they don't have a task anymore, and unfortunately, bad thoughts happen. Whereas with hockey, with that team effort, that bonding effort, you're working towards a goal, and it really connects with a lot of service members, which I could absolutely see that. So I think that's where the Coyotes probably saved their skin, was all the community outreach that they do. I think really showed to Tempe, hey, this is a group of people. It's not just, oh, this is a sports team that's just going to come here and make a bunch of money. It's also a sports team that does truly care and wants to give back to the community out of the greater Phoenix area as a whole, not just not just Glendale, not just Phoenix, not just Tempe, like the whole valley.
I would very much just like to, with no disrespect, I'd very much like to move on to a couple of the concerns with how the deal is structured. Just primarily because that kind of that's kind of hard to hear from me. I just no real personal reason except for I find myself empathizing with things I don't understand fully. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about how the deal is structured and how it's all on the taxpayers, going on the taxpayers. So how the deal is structured is they want to, I think it's an 8-year period of Mr. Murillo not paying property tax. Then once the property taxes kick in, is it half of the percentage that would go to Tempe specifically? So the schools still get theirs, the county, the state, whatever. But the portion that I think it was 6.9% or 7 points,
something like that. It can be worked out.
They want most of that to go to be rerouted to help paying for the costs of the construction. Same thing with sales tax is going to be an additional 6%. So that's not just the Tempe sales tax. That's an additional fee. The thing's going to be a little more expensive, and it'll essentially help pay for itself, like Mr. Woods was explaining. Where it's like that money will go to help paying off the debts or whatever for the construction costs. And there was one valid concern by the other lady that said no, was that essentially Tempe's not going to be seeing benefit from it for a while. And I'm like, in a way, yes and no, because they want part of that, and again, it's negotiable. It can be a higher percentage going back to Tempe, but of the percentage that does go to Tempe, they want part of that rerouted. So if you're same thing with that 6.9% that tax the Coyotes will be implementing on property. If you are not going to a game, if you are not going there, you're not buying beer, buying a jersey, buying a ticket, you are not paying for this whatsoever. That's how they wanted it structured. They wanted, what was it, $30 million in help with the
land remediation.
Yeah, remediation. I want to say restitution. That is not the correct word. It's not the correct word whatsoever. But remediation for the land. The Coyotes putting up $40 million, non-refundable. So theoretically speaking, this just the cynic in me. The city of Tempe could vote to move forward. They can go with the agreement. They could take that money and it'll help remediate the land, and then just say, yeah, we changed our mind. Theoretically speaking, just keep that in the back of your mind as a cynic, because it's always best to at least have the worst case scenario in the back of your noggin there. But they non-refundable. On top of that, they do want help with the infrastructure, and it sounds logical to me. Like the way they made it sound, it was like, what is it? It's sewage, gas, the electrical lines all going towards the project. Like that's
yeah.
what they want help with.
I want to talk about that a little bit because one of the two ladies that said no, she was the one who brought this up, saying all of our previous projects, the builder pays for all the sewage and stuff like that. With sports venues, that is not the case. So this is a very big kind of misconception that she had, because as you look down the Tempe Town Lake, you look at all these big, beautiful projects that they built. I'm sure those builders probably paid for sewage, electrical, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at all of the venues here in the valley and mostly over the country, that's not the case. The city pays for that proportion, and then the venue, pays for whatever, whether it's funded by taxpayers or it's privately funded. So that is not the case. That's why she's like, she's thinking of it as like the buildings that are down Tempe Town Lake. She's like, all those buildings we didn't have to pay for this. Why do we have to pay for this one? Well, that's why. It's because it's a very common practice and very standard that arenas are, generally speaking, the city function of them with gas and sewage and water and stuff like that. That is generally paid for by the city.
The other thing, other stadiums are completely publicly funded as well, where it's like everything is publicly funded, including, I think, in most places, the maintenance and running, because obviously you pay a company. I think like ARG comes to mind just as an example. They'll come in, they'll hire everyone to like manage the arena and make sure everything functions, but you're still paying for that.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say too was that the naming rights would also go to the city of Tempe, which they projected out over $120 million over the course of that time, where they are getting tax breaks. The city of Tempe would also be receiving that money. So it's one of those things.
It's a pretty good like amount that they quoted, but just to throw that in there in case it gets misquoted, it's a portion of the naming rights. It's still significant, but
I thought it was the full naming rights.
From what at least just from how I interpreted what Mr. Woods was saying, it was towards the very end of the meeting, if I remember correctly. He listed that back off, and he said also a percentage or a portion, or however he worded it, but of the naming rights goes to the city of Tempe, estimated at, what was it, $350 million? Don't quote me on that. I'm just trying to. No,
it was less than that. It was so taxes was going to be like 140, like so. So if you projected out the taxes, it's like they would owe the city of Tempe, after those 8 years or whatever the math was, they would owe them like 140 million, and then the naming rights came out to like 120 million. So the offsetting cost was about 20 million, and the reason they did that was because of the way they structured this business. So it wasn't just because like, oh, we're gonna scam you or something. It could be, but we don't know the ulterior motives there. But to what he was talking about, and it seemed pretty logical, the way they've structured this bill or this whatever, they had to do it that way because of a lawsuit that had happened previously in years past because of something to do with taxes. I don't remember exactly. I'm not like a tax expert like he is. But I did perceive it was like it's structured this way because of that, where they had to take those tax breaks in order to not get sued, and then in return they're going to try to throw money back in with the naming rights to Tempe, and that's money that is just cash in hand.